We start part two with a look at the lemon picker. And I actually really like this little painting because you don't actually get to see any of the lemons, but the lemon color has been kind of transformed over to the landscape itself. This is very reminiscent in my mind of the very famous painting, The Yellow Christ, that he did while he was in Brittany. But we can see the evolution taking place. We can see him kind of becoming more comfortable with what he's painting and developing, again, the style that we really do think of as Gauguin, these larger patches of color and associations with them. Again, that yellow, so bright and so wonderful, put next to that green in a way that almost looks like they are a stained glass window, this very sharp line kind of cutting through the landscape. The Little Valley from 1891, and this is a nice piece to actually kind of inspect what he's actually doing in terms of composition. You can readily see the brush strokes themselves forming the landscape, and again, you can see the variations that he's actually doing, almost in a way similar to Cezanne, but not quite to that extreme. We have the up and downs, and then as we look at the trees, we have more of a formation of diagonals. Again, we have these smaller people in the landscape itself, showing the proximity, if you will, to the space. The wonderful branching of colors that he has as we go from the tree. We see blues and greens on up the hillside itself. A very nice piece. And again, this is just a reminder of what the landscape of Tahiti would look like when he was there. We have a series of photographs that we've been looking at as we go along. And again, it looks very, very nice. You can see the same hilling kind of landscapes there in the background, and this is a little bit more remote. You can tell by the housing. If we look in the background, we can see this looks more like traditional Tahitian style rather than the Western white rectangle with the triangle on the top style that we're used to seeing closer to the coast and the capital part of the town. Just as a reminder, he's living in kind of rural Tahiti, but he's still enjoying a lot of the conveniences of Europe at the same time. Again, just a nice little view of the Tahitian landscape. I love the little figure standing in the water there in the foreground. And again, this would be a lot closer to where Gauguin would be living during this time period, more of a rural kind of location, not that far from the capital itself, but certainly not what you would think of as the downtown area of Tahiti. And again, when we look at the landscape, we see the tropical aspects to it. It's a reminder that, again, he had to deal with a lot of the things that we take for granted from the time. There is no air conditioning, there's rampant disease, the food might be a problem too, even though from my understanding he ate mostly canned food from Europe. Here we have the famous portrait of Teha'amana, and also a sculpture of her. And this is, of course, this 14-year-old bride that he took when he was in Tahiti. And 14-year-old bride, we automatically have these bad connotations that go with it. And again, we need to remind ourselves that we're looking at a different culture and a different time period. And it's very easy to put moralistic judgments on things that occurred in the past. Not that this was acceptable in any way, but nonetheless, it was acceptable by the society he was in, or else he would never have been able to do it. When we look at this is kind of the painting itself, Woman with the Flower, very reminiscent of the work he was doing with Van Gogh. Again, when we look at the yellow flowers and how they seem to be part of the background moving forward into the chair. Here we have Are You Jealous from 1892, and when we look in the background, we see, again, that Cloisonnism that we associate so much with Gauguin. And, you know, this is many of his paintings from this time period come in the form of a question. And here we have the two naked women laying on the beach. And this question, I imagine he's in some way trying to ask to the people, his friends and patrons back in Europe, and maybe asking with the idea of the reality of his life as well. You know, again, the idea is that he's going to these places kind of to reach this primitive paradise and paint from this location and move these paintings back to Europe. Here in the background, we can really see the effects of that Cloisonnism that we keep mentioning, this uses of packets of color to kind of form the landscape. It really becomes more and more abstract, and it makes sense. He's landscape with peacocks. He's emulating the peacock feathers, at least in some part, with the variety of colors that are in the background. You'll notice that they all form these kind of organic type of packets. Again, if we think of the lush environment that he's living in and the type of feeling that you would have from this living in this space and the thick vegetation around, it kind of naturally pushes you towards making organic shapes rather than rectilinear forms. Olden times from 1892. The god Oro would be the Polynesian god of war and one of the major gods of their pantheon. And here we have kind of an example of that god, but from my understanding, it should be remembered that there weren't any Tahitian idols that were left over by the time that Gauguin got there, that most of these would have been destroyed during the time of the missionaries, which occurred a little bit before the time that Gauguin actually showed up. So in this, he's kind of making a fictitious idol as much as anything, kind of making this imaginary image in his mind of what this god might be. He had a fascination with the god Oro, but again, we don't really have any visual examples. Tahitian village from 1892, almost a European style rather than the style from what he was really working with. This almost seems like he's taking a regular approach, if you will, or a historical approach to landscape to the Tahitian village, rather than experimenting with the variety of colors and organic shapes that we're used to seeing from previous paintings in the Tahitian landscape type of view. Again, we have to remember that these paintings, at least in his mind, are going back to Europe, and they eventually do go back to Europe. So that might be the case with this. The House of Singing, in his trips here, I see just a little bit of evidence of some of the actual Tahitian life. House of Singing, we look at this and we don't see anyone really singing. It seems more like a throng of people. In my mind, it really reminded me of the sitting people that we saw from the photograph. If we look over in the right corner, we'll look at a detail of the painting in particular. If you look at the slats, we look like we're inside what we would think of as a traditional Tahitian architecture style. And again, we have this semblance of the slats forming the walls. And then if we look at the ceiling, we can see the broad beams that the palm leaves would undoubtedly be laid over. Over in the right corner, as mentioned, it's almost a direct copy of a painting that we've looked at earlier of the two Tahitian women wearing, again, these two outfits that we really do associate with the colonialization. And again, these are European outfits, but when we look at that in proximity to the rest of the colors, they become very muted, and the design really does become part of the landscape as much as anything else. When we look at the people and we kind of move towards the background, they become one of a larger grouping where it's very hard to distinguish the individuals rather from the group itself. Again, this type of faux history, if you will, the sacred mountain, and again, that god up on the mountaintop, beautiful yellow color, very much like the lemon pickers. You could draw a parallel between this and, again, the yellow Christ. I love the florals in the foreground and how he's essentially taken the form of these flowers and grouped them together into this organic shape with this nice lavender tone, leading into the bright red colors that you would see in these wonderful Pacific flowers that you would find on these on the Polynesian islands. Wonderful woodwork again. Not 100% sure if that woodwork was actually there or not, but again, a lot of this might be kind of constructed from elements you might be seeing from other areas in the world. Spirit of the Dead Watching is one of the more famous paintings he did from his first trip to Tahiti. Here we have his young wife sleeping in bed, and as the story goes, he was coming home late at night and startled her, if you will, and she gave him a certain look that really kind of struck him in a strange way. When we look at the painting itself, we of course have the image of youth naked lying in front of us, but in the background we have the figure, the dead spirit, if you will, with a face that almost looks like a mask, which we only see from the side, looking into the scene itself, looking over the shoulder, almost as if the girl is not quite aware that he is there, but has this sensation as if she is being watched. We also see a lot of variations along basic themes that he's developed. Again, seeing these two women in connection with each other. What's new and when are you getting married? We have, again, the same outfits kind of repeated, with the exception of what's new on the left. The girl on the right in that painting, her outfit has been changed from that longer peach-colored European-style dress that we can see again in the right to a more traditional or faux traditional, if you will, type of garment. Again, we can start to see him really creating solid patterns of color in place of the landscape. When we look at the woman's dress and the yellow patterns, we can see it also in the landscape itself. So I put these two in comparison. This is Woman with a Mango from 1892, and again, Woman with a Flower from 1891. Just 1 year difference in terms of these paintings, and we really see that Gauguin is kind of really changing or mastering his approach. There's a lot of fluidity to the painting on the left, where on the right it's a very kind of static type of form. We can see his style changing through that again. If we look at the solid yellow in the background on the painting on the left, and we put that in comparison with the wonderful deep blue tones of the dress and the even bluer tones of the fabric behind it,